Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Charleston. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time when you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know what places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1848, when Charleston society first began to whisper about the fires. Not the usual mishaps that plagued any city built of wood and candlelight, but calculated, methodical flames that seemed to select their targets with uncanny precision. Always the grandest homes on the Battery, always when the families had retreated to their summer estates, always leaving behind nothing but ash and questions. It began with the Rutledge estate on Meeting Street, a three-story federal mansion that had stood as a monument to Charleston's aristocracy for nearly 40 years. On July 12, 1848, sometime past midnight, the night watchman noticed an orange glow from the rear of the property. By the time bells were rung and water brigades formed, the mansion's heart was already engulfed. What puzzled investigators was not just the speed of the blaze, but its surgical precision. Only the main house burned, not the carriage house, not the kitchen building, not even the slave quarters merely 20 yards away. It burned as if someone knew the house intimately, noted Charleston Mercury editor Robert Barnwell Rhett in his personal correspondence, recovered decades later from his family archives. As if someone who had spent years within its walls had selected exactly where and how to bring it down most efficiently. The Rutledge family had departed just 3 days earlier for their summer estate in Flat Rock, North Carolina, as was customary for Charleston's elite during the fever months. Only the household staff remained behind, 5 slaves tasked with maintaining the property during the family's absence. All 5 survived the fire. All 5 provided identical accounts. They had been asleep in their quarters when the flames awoke them. None had seen or heard anything unusual earlier that evening. The Charleston City Guard questioned each servant extensively, as was procedure. The investigation was led by Captain William Johnson, whose meticulous notes survive today in the Charleston County Historical Society archives. "The slaves appeared genuinely shocked by the fire," Johnson wrote. "Yet something feels rehearsed in their identical testimonies. Either they've coordinated their stories, or someone has instructed them precisely what to say." 2 weeks passed. The ruins of the Rutledge home were still being cleared when, on July 26th, the Pinckney's residence on South Battery erupted in flames. Again, the family was away. Again, only the main house burned while surrounding structures remained untouched. Again, the house slaves reported hearing and seeing nothing unusual until the fire was well underway. By August 9th, when the third mansion, belonging to the prominent Middleton family, burned under identical circumstances, panic had taken hold of Charleston society. The pattern was undeniable. Someone was systematically targeting the homes of the city's most established families, and they possessed intimate knowledge of these households' schedules and vulnerabilities. The Charleston City Council convened an emergency session on August 11th. Mayor Thomas Leaguer Hutchinson proposed doubling night patrols in the city's southern districts, where the wealthy resided. More controversial was his second proposal, a mandatory registration of all household servants with detailed records of their movements and relationships. This proposal, while ostensibly targeting all domestic workers, was clearly aimed at enslaved household servants who were increasingly viewed with suspicion. "The threat comes from within our homes," declared Councilman James Harrison in a speech recorded by the council clerk. "We have harbored vipers in our midst, given them our trust and authority over our most intimate spaces, and now we reap the consequences of such misplaced confidence." This narrative of trusted house slaves betraying their masters gained traction among Charleston's anxious elite. Yet hard evidence remained elusive. No incendiary devices were found. No witnesses came forward with sightings of suspicious persons. The fires simply materialized, as if summoned from within the houses themselves. On August 21st, a letter arrived at the offices of the Charleston Mercury. The handwriting was elegant, educated, clearly that of someone with formal schooling. The letter was signed simply Justice and began with words that sent shudders through Charleston society. I have burned 3 houses. I will burn 7 more. The letter was immediately turned over to authorities, who kept its contents sealed from public knowledge until 1869, when historical archivist Eliza Middleton reconstructed the events while researching her family's history. According to Middleton's papers, the letter continued, "Each house represents a sin. Each family carries guilt unknown to the world, but known to me. The flames are merely the external manifestation of the corruption that has festered within these walls for decades." Captain Johnson's investigation intensified. He compiled a list of educated free blacks and slaves known to be literate, focusing particularly on those who had access to multiple elite households. The list numbered 47 individuals. Each was interrogated, their handwriting compared to the mysterious letter, their whereabouts during the fires scrutinized. Meanwhile, Charleston's elite retreated further into fear. Those who had planned to remain in the city during summer now hastily departed. Those already at their summer residences extended their stays indefinitely. Houses stood empty along the Battery and Meeting Street, their occupants too frightened to return. It was during this tense period that Thomas Grimball, a prominent banker and plantation owner, received a letter at his country estate near Edisto Island. Unlike the public letter to the newspaper, this correspondence was intensely personal. "Your eldest son knows what happened in the cellar during the Christmas party of 1843, it read. "The girl was 13 years old. Her name was Rebecca. You called her Becky. The marks on her back never healed properly." Grimball burned the letter immediately. He then wrote to Captain Johnson, requesting increased security for his Charleston residence, claiming vague concerns about the recent pattern of fires. The house remained untouched for exactly 17 days. On September 8th, it became the 4th mansion to burn. The Grimball fire deviated from the established pattern in one significant detail. It began in the cellar. Fire investigators noted that the point of origin appeared to be a small storage room that, according to house plans, had once been used to house difficult slaves requiring isolation. The room had been converted to storage some years earlier. After the Grimball fire, the mysterious correspondent became more active. Letters arrived at the homes of the Manigolds, the Draytons, the Ravenels, all old Charleston families with vast wealth built upon slave labor. Each letter contained specific allegations. A young woman sold away from her children after resisting a master's advances. Twins deliberately separated at auction despite a promise to keep them together. A cook blinded in one eye as punishment for a meal that displeased a guest. The details were specific, dates were provided, names were named. And each letter concluded with the same ominous promise: the fire comes next. City authorities attempted to intercept these letters, establishing a special detachment to monitor the postal service. But the letters continued to appear, sometimes delivered conventionally, sometimes discovered on doorsteps or breakfast tables, as if placed there by someone with access to the houses themselves. By early October, 10 mansions had burned. The pattern expanded beyond Charleston's peninsula to include plantations in the surrounding countryside. The city had descended into a state of paranoia. Slave patrols were doubled, then tripled. Household servants were locked in their quarters at night. Some families dismissed their entire staff, preferring to struggle with household duties themselves rather than harbor potential arsonists. It was Rachel Singleton, the 17-year-old daughter of plantation owner Edward Singleton, who first connected the victims beyond their obvious status as wealthy slaveholders. In a diary recovered from the ruins of the Singleton plantation house, which burned on October 12th, Rachel wrote, "Father received the letter yesterday. He locked himself in his study afterward and drank until past midnight. This morning at breakfast, he would not meet my eyes." The letter mentioned Mother's cousin Daniel and a trading company formed in 1830. "I listened at Father's door tonight and heard him speaking with Uncle Frederick. They mentioned the ship repeatedly and seemed terrified that he had discovered documentation of their involvement. The ship Rachel referenced would later be identified as the Echo, a vessel intercepted by the U.S. Navy in 1858 with 450 enslaved Africans aboard, a clear violation of the federal ban on the international slave trade that had been in effect since 1808. But historical records compiled by maritime historian Richard Thompson in 1961 revealed that the Echo was merely the last in a long line of illegal slave ships operated by a consortium of Charleston businessmen. Thompson's research indicated this consortium had been active as early as 1830, bringing thousands of illegally enslaved Africans into the United States long after such activity had been criminalized. The consortium included members of all 10 families whose homes had burned. As October drew to a close, Charleston existed in a state of siege. The city's economic activity had ground nearly to a halt. Families slept in shifts, with at least one member always awake and watching for signs of fire. Household slaves were kept under constant supervision, a task that exhausted their owners and created unbearable tension within homes. On October 30th, Captain Johnson received a breakthrough. A letter had been discovered in the process of being delivered to the Priolo family residence. The messenger, a free black man named Isaiah Thompson, was apprehended. Under interrogation, Thompson admitted he had received the letter from another free black man, a carpenter known as Joseph Williams, who had commissioned him to deliver it for a small payment. Joseph Williams was not unknown to Charleston authorities. Born into slavery in 1810, he had been granted his freedom in 1832 by his owner, a progressive minister who had provided him with education and training as a carpenter. Williams was known for his exceptional craftsmanship and was often hired to work on the homes of Charleston's elite, giving him intimate knowledge of their floor plans and household routines. More damning was the discovery that William's mother had been aboard an illegal slave ship that arrived in Charleston in 1829. She had been purchased by the Rutledge family, owners of the first mansion to burn, and had died giving birth to a second child in 1833. The infant had also died. According to witness statements collected by Captain Johnson, Williams had maintained for years that his mother had been healthy before the birth, and that negligent care had caused her death. City guards surrounded Williams' modest home on Anson Street on the evening of October 30th. Williams was not there. His neighbors reported he had departed that morning carrying a small bag, saying he had been commissioned for work at a plantation outside the city. A search of his home revealed a locked desk drawer containing unmailed letters addressed to the remaining 7 families on his apparent list. Each detailed specific crimes, not just participation in illegal slave trading, but personal acts of cruelty and violence that had largely gone unpunished. Most significantly, investigators found a journal written in William's hand, detailing his methodology for setting the fires. He had indeed used his carpentry work to study each house, identifying structural vulnerabilities and planning points of entry. But he had not acted alone. In each case, he had cultivated relationships with at least one household slave who had suffered specific abuses at their owner's hands. These individuals had provided access to the houses and sometimes assisted directly in setting the fires. The journal's final entry, dated October 29th, read, 10 flames for 10 crimes. Justice has been partially served. I leave the remaining 7 to God's judgment as my time here draws to a close. I have received word that passage has been secured on a vessel bound for Haiti. By the time this journal is discovered, I will be beyond the reach of Charleston's law, though not beyond the reach of my conscience, which remains troubled by the methods I have employed to achieve justice. A massive manhunt was launched, extending from Charleston to every port city along the eastern seaboard. Ships bound for the Caribbean were searched. Descriptions of Joseph Williams were distributed to authorities in Haiti, Jamaica, and other territories where a free black man might seek refuge. Yet no trace of him was ever confirmed. The 7 families named in the unmailed letters never saw their houses burn. Yet in the years that followed, each family experienced gradual but unmistakable decline. The Ulston banking fortune collapsed in the Panic of 1857. The Huger plantation was destroyed during the Civil War. The remaining families saw their wealth and influence steadily erode through poor investments, legal troubles, or the changing economic landscape following emancipation. Captain Johnson, who had led the investigation, retired from the Charleston City Guard in 1850 and opened a private detective agency. Among his papers, discovered after his death in 1872, was a sealed envelope containing his private conclusions about the case. He wrote, "While the evidence against Joseph Williams appears conclusive, I remain troubled by certain inconsistencies. The handwriting in the threatening letters, while similar to that in Williams' journal, displays subtle differences that suggest they may have been written by different hands." More troubling is the question of how Williams, despite his unusual education, could have acquired such detailed knowledge of the illegal slaving activities of Charleston's most powerful families, information that was carefully guarded even from most white citizens of comparable status. Johnson's notes suggest he came to believe that Williams may have been working in concert with, or perhaps even on behalf of, someone with connections to Charleston's white elite. Someone with access to business records and family secrets that would have been inaccessible to even the most well-positioned, free black man in antebellum Charleston. Someone, perhaps, with their own motivations for destroying these particular families. This theory gained traction in 1948, exactly 100 years after the fires, when historian Margaret Thornwell published The Charleston Fire Conspiracy, drawing on newly discovered correspondence between several prominent Charleston clergymen of the period. These letters referenced a conscience-stricken participant in the trade who had allegedly provided documented evidence of the illegal slaving operation to Joseph Williams. Thornwell theorized that this unknown figure, possibly a business partner who had grown disgusted with the enterprise, had used Williams as the instrument of a revenge plot that served both their purposes. The true and complete story of the Charleston mansion fires may never be known. The last person known to have communicated directly with Joseph Williams died in 1895, taking whatever knowledge she possessed to her grave. The families involved worked diligently to expunge the events from Charleston's official history, and for many decades they largely succeeded. What remains are the ash-filled foundations of 10 grand houses, the scattered documents that survived the intervening years, and the persistent whispers that still circulate among some of Charleston's oldest families. Stories of an educated carpenter who brought a terrible reckoning upon those who believed their wealth and position would forever shield them from the consequences of their actions. Some tour guides in Charleston's historic district still point out the vacant lots where certain mansions once stood, explaining that the properties remain cursed and uninhabitable. Few mention the fires directly. Fewer still speak the name Joseph Williams. But in certain archives, in fading journals and yellowed newspaper clippings, the story remains for those determined enough to piece it together. A reminder that the most terrifying fires are those ignited not by random chance, but by the cold, calculating flame of human vengeance. Even today, occasional reports emerge from Charleston of construction workers uncovering charred foundations when breaking ground for new buildings near the battery. And more than one crew has reported finding, buried deep in the soil, small carved wooden tokens, carpenter's markers, some say, left behind as signatures by a craftsman who built not just with wood and nail, but with fire and retribution. The fire department archives in Charleston contain one final curiosity related to this case. In 1965, during renovation of their headquarters building, workers discovered a small sealed box hidden within a wall. Inside was a yellowed page containing just one sentence, written in the same elegant hand as the threatening letters from 1848. Justice comes for everyone, if not in this life, then in history's judgment. The handwriting has never been conclusively matched to any known individual. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Charleston mansion fires was not the destruction itself, but the systematic exposure of secrets that Charleston society had worked so diligently to bury. Each fire illuminated not just a physical structure, but the dark foundation upon which much of the city's wealth and prestige had been built. In 1869, as Reconstruction reshaped the South, a former slave named Martha Goodwin provided testimony to a federal commission investigating crimes committed under slavery. Goodwin, who had been owned by the Pinckney family, victims of the second fire, claimed knowledge of the events surrounding the mansion burnings. Her account, preserved in the National Archives, offers a perspective absent from official Charleston records. "The fires were no mystery to those of us who lived within those walls," Goodwin stated. "We knew which floorboards creaked, which doors were left unlocked, which masters kept secrets. When the letters began arriving, word spread through Charleston's invisible community, those who served food, laundered linens, and raised children while remaining unseen themselves. Many knew Joseph Williams. Some helped him. None betrayed him." Goodwin's testimony suggested a far more extensive network of resistance than official accounts acknowledged, not an isolated carpenter acting on personal grievance, but a coordinated effort supported by dozens of individuals, both enslaved and free, who had suffered under Charleston's aristocracy. This alternative narrative gained further support in 1952 when construction workers renovating an old carriage house that had once belonged to the Huger family discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a small wooden box containing what appeared to be a ledger, water-damaged but partially legible. The ledger contained dates, names, and locations, a detailed record of movements between households, deliveries of unmarked packages, and times of access to various properties. Historian Thomas Maybank, who examined the ledger before it disappeared from the Charleston Museum archives in 1954, concluded it represented nothing less than a coordinated underground network operating within Charleston's enslaved and free black communities. The network, Maybank theorized, had existed primarily to share information and provide mutual aid, but had been mobilized by Williams to execute his campaign of targeted vengeance. The disappearance of the ledger, along with several other key documents related to the fires, from supposedly secure archives, points to ongoing efforts to suppress certain aspects of Charleston's history. Even in the mid-20th century, descendants of the affected families maintained considerable influence in the city's institutions. One document that survived, however, was the detailed confession of Samuel Porter, former overseer at the Drayton plantation, recorded by a Union Army chaplain in 1865. Porter, dying of consumption and seeking absolution, claimed he had witnessed the early planning stages of what would become the mansion burning campaign. According to Porter, Williams had initially approached several white abolitionists with evidence of the illegal slave trading operation, seeking legal justice. He was told repeatedly that no court in South Carolina would hear such a case against the city's most powerful men, Porter stated. After exhausting every avenue toward legal remedy, Williams reportedly said, "If the law offers no justice, then justice must come by other means." Porter's confession includes a detail absent from other accounts: the alleged involvement of Harold Whitmore, a Northern-educated lawyer who had returned to his native Charleston, harboring increasingly radical abolitionist views. Porter claimed Whitmore had provided Williams with legal documents revealing the financial structures behind the illegal slave-trading consortium, information that would have been inaccessible to Williams through his own connections. Whitmore's role, if Porter's account is accurate, adds another layer to an already complex conspiracy. Census records confirm that Whitmore left Charleston abruptly in October 1848, precisely when the manhunt for Williams intensified, and resurfaced 2 years later in Boston, where he practiced law until his death in 1875. His personal papers, donated to Harvard Law School by his widow, make no mention of Joseph Williams or the Charleston fires, though several pages appear to have been removed from his journals covering the years 1845 to 1850. The involvement of white abolitionists in the mansion burnings remains a contested aspect of the narrative. Some historians, like Thornwell, see compelling evidence for such collaboration. Others maintain that attributing the sophisticated planning to white co-conspirators diminishes Williams's agency and intelligence. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a network of resistors that crossed racial lines, united by opposition to the particularly brutal form of slavery practiced by Charleston's elite. What is clear from surviving records is that the investigation effectively ended with Williams' disappearance. By November 1848, Charleston authorities had arrested 27 slaves and free blacks suspected of involvement in the conspiracy. 3 died in custody under suspicious circumstances. The remainder were either sold to traders operating in the Deep South or imprisoned on various charges unrelated to the fires. Captain Johnson's investigation files note his frustration with this outcome. In a private letter to his brother in Virginia, he wrote, "Politics has overwhelmed justice. The guilty parties, those who actually struck the matches, may indeed be among those arrested, but I am certain the true architect of this conspiracy remains at large. More troubling is the complete cessation of interest in pursuing certain avenues of investigation that might implicate white citizens. I am being directed quite forcefully to focus exclusively on the Negro carpenter and his immediate associates." The conspiracy of silence extended beyond law enforcement. Charleston's newspapers, after initially reporting extensively on the fires, abruptly curtailed their coverage in November 1848. The Charleston Mercury, which had received the first public letter from Justice, published an editorial on November 15th, calling for an end to excessive public discourse about the fires, arguing that such attention only serves to inflame tensions and inspire potential copycat incidents. By December, public discussion of the fires had been effectively suppressed. The arrested suspects were processed through the legal system with minimal publicity. Properties were rebuilt or sold quietly. Families affected by the fires gradually returned to their social positions, though many noted a subtle but persistent change in how they were regarded by their peers. A letter discovered in 1968 among the personal effects of Elizabeth Alston, daughter of one of the targeted families, suggests the social consequences were more significant than public records indicate. Though no one speaks of it directly, the fires have cast a pall over our family that shows no sign of lifting. Invitations arrive less frequently. Conversations halt when father enters a room. It is as though Charleston society has collectively decided we must have done something to deserve our fate, and while they will not name it openly, they have judged us accordingly. The physical and social landscape of Charleston was permanently altered by the fires of 1848, but perhaps the most profound impact was psychological. The campaign of strategic arson demonstrated the vulnerability of a system that relied on absolute control. The homes of Charleston's elite had been designed as fortresses of privilege, with separate entrances, servants' staircases, and carefully delineated boundaries between white and black spaces. The fires revealed these barriers to be illusory. The same intimate knowledge that allowed enslaved people to serve effectively also gave them the power to destroy. Moreover, the precision of the attacks, targeting only families involved in illegal slave trading rather than slaveholders generally, suggested a sophisticated moral calculus that Charleston society found deeply unsettling. This was not indiscriminate violence, but calculated retribution, implying judgment by an entity capable of distinguishing degrees of guilt, even within a system Charleston's elite considered universally justified. In the decades following the Civil War, as Charleston rebuilt and reimagined itself, the story of the Mansion fires was gradually subsumed into a broader narrative of Southern victimhood. Tour guides began attributing the burns to Union sympathizers or criminal elements taking advantage of wartime chaos, displacing the events from 1848 to the 1860s. By the early 20th century, few Charlestonians could accurately date the fires, and fewer still acknowledged their systematic nature or the specific targeting of families involved in illegal slave trading. This historical amnesia was not accidental, but carefully cultivated. In 1910, the Charleston Historical Society established a committee specifically tasked with harmonizing discordant elements in our city's historical narrative. Committee records indicate particular concern with the Mansion fires, which presented slaveholders not as benevolent paternalists, but as criminals, even by the standards of their own time, engaged in activities that had been federally prohibited for decades. The committee's solution was not to deny the fires had occurred, but to fragment the narrative, treating each as an isolated incident, obscuring the connections between victims, and emphasizing property damage over the moral exposures that accompanied each blaze. This strategy largely succeeded in defanging the most subversive aspects of the story. Yet the truth persisted in fragments, preserved in family stories passed down through generations of black Charlestonians, in scattered documents that escaped purging, and in the architectural record of the city itself, the conspicuous empty lots and newer structures interrupting rows of period homes. In 1965, as the civil rights movement forced a national reckoning with historical narratives of slavery and its aftermath, Charleston historian Gerald Hayward attempted the first comprehensive academic study of the 1848 fires. His research brought him to the sealed records of the Charleston Orphan House, where he discovered intake documents for 4 children surrendered by Joseph Williams in October 1848, just before his disappearance. The intake forms listed the children, ages 13, 10, 7, and 5, as the offspring of Williams and his wife Sarah, who had died in 1846. Williams' letter accompanying the surrender requested that the children be placed with God-fearing families outside of Charleston and included sufficient funds to support their care for 1 year. The letter concluded with a statement that Hayward found revelatory to understanding Williams' motivations. "I act now not from want of love for my children, but from its abundance. The path I have chosen cannot accommodate innocence. They must be spared both the burden of my actions and the retribution that will surely follow. When they are grown and ask after their father, tell them only that he sought justice in a world that offered none freely." This document, suggesting Williams had anticipated and accepted the personal cost of his campaign, complicated the narrative of an anger-driven vendetta. It presented instead a man making a calculated sacrifice, his relationship with his children, to pursue what he viewed as justice. The fate of Joseph Williams himself remains the greatest mystery in this entire affair. No confirmed record of his arrival in Haiti or any other Caribbean nation has ever been found. No death certificate or burial record exists. He simply vanished from historical record after October 1848. This absence has fueled numerous theories. Some historians believe Williams successfully escaped to Haiti and lived under an assumed name. Others suggest he may have made his way to Canada or even England, where abolition had come earlier, and a skilled carpenter could find work without facing the racism endemic to the United States. More grim assessments propose that Williams never left Charleston at all, that his planned escape was discovered and he was quietly eliminated, his body disposed of without record. A tantalizing possible sighting appears in an 1871 account by Frederick Douglass, who described meeting an elderly carpenter in Haiti whose knowledge of Charleston society and its iniquities was so detailed as to suggest personal experience rather than mere hearsay. Douglass, not yet aware of the full story behind the Charleston fires, did not record the man's name or probe further into his background. Perhaps the most fitting epilogue to this story came in 1970, when descendants of the Middleton family commissioned a renovation of their ancestral plantation home outside Charleston. Workers removing an old mantelpiece discovered a small cavity containing a sealed glass bottle. Inside was a yellowed sheet of paper bearing a message written in the same distinctive hand as the threatening letters from 1848. Remember that foundations built on suffering will never stand secure. The past is never truly buried. Justice may delay, but it does not forget. The Middleton descendants donated the note anonymously to the Charleston Museum, where it was briefly displayed before being removed from exhibition during a reorganization of the collection in 1973. It has not been publicly displayed since. The story of the Charleston Mansion fires offers no neat resolution, no satisfying conclusion where justice is definitively served or denied. Like much of American history around slavery and its legacies, it remains fragmented, contested, and partially obscured, visible primarily through its negative spaces and lasting impacts, rather than through a clear and agreed-upon narrative. What we know with certainty is that in 1848, 10 of Charleston's grandest homes burned to their foundations. 10 families directly implicated in illegal slave trading faced a public reckoning they had long avoided. And for a brief moment, the carefully maintained social order of the antebellum South was thrown into disarray by the actions of those deemed powerless within that system. The fires themselves have long since cooled. But in archives and family histories, in architectural absences and institutional silences, their heat can still be felt, a reminder that no system of oppression, however entrenched, has ever been safe from the flames of resistance. Today, visitors to Charleston's historic district walk past the sites where these mansions once stood, often unaware of the complex history beneath their feet. Tour guides point out architectural features and family crests, recounting sanitized narratives of Charleston's golden age. Few mention Joseph Williams, the carpenter whose skill built structures and whose determination unmade them. Viewers still acknowledge the network of enslaved individuals who aided his work, converting their intimate knowledge of these homes from a tool of servitude into an instrument of retribution. But if you visit the city during the humid months of summer, when the air hangs heavy and still, locals say you might catch the faint scent of smoke on certain streets near the Battery, an olfactory echo of a time when Charleston's night sky glowed orange with the exposure of long-buried secrets, and justice arrived on a carpenter's terms when the law's remedies failed. In the words attributed to Joseph Williams in the final entry of his recovered journal, they believed their wealth made them untouchable, their position unassailable. They forgot that the same hands that built their mansions could also reduce them to ash. Let history remember that no one, Not the highest judge, nor the wealthiest merchant, stands above justice forever.